Well, I'd like to convince you that I'm in my sacred space right now, but unfortunately that's not the case. It's the first day of classes, and I'm not there. I'm here in Philadelphia, waiting for class to begin. But I want to talk a little bit about the concept of sacred space as I understand it. And I want to start with a quote from Dr. Paul's book on page 55. He said that the meaning of the place, talking about the Vietnam memorial, was not fixed and could not be fixed. It would always be open to new interpretations, depending on the poetry of how it was described, the political structures and support that controlled it, and especially the pilgrims who attended to it. Its future was truly open. And I feel that way about a slightly different place. It's an island south of Florida, 5.9 square miles, called Key West. And I want to talk to you a little bit about my relationship with Key West as sacred space. I want to talk about it in terms of the metaphors and the poetry surrounding Key West in my world, a little bit about the politics as I understand them, and then kind of wrap up with this idea of the pilgrimages that I've taken to Key West over the last 20 years. A little bit about the metaphors that surround Key West. First of all, they made their money primarily by salvaging shipwrecks. So that's a little dodgy start to begin with, taking other people's property or salvaging other people's property. And I think the whole place has a little bit of that mentality still left in it. A little less than absolutely on the level. Ernest Hemingway, you think of him as a great writer, but the stories that we hear more are how he went from bar to bar on Key West and why he constructed his house the way he did to facilitate some of his exciting adventures. Tennessee Williams, Audubon, lots of people over the course of history have been attended there, but mostly people who are a little bit offbeat. The thing that I consider kind of interesting in terms of a metaphor is this conch republic idea that you keep hearing when you're on Key West. And really it commemorates a real event. In 1982, they had a dispute with the federal government about border patrols and about immigration, and they ended up blocking US 1 and declaring themselves an independent nation, turning around the next day and applying to the United States for foreign aid. And of course, the rebellion was put down pretty quickly. But again, a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek effort to try to express something about the island that is unique. 1995, I made my first visit there, and I've been there probably 15 times in the last 20 years or so. The first time and many times I've made the trip down from Fort Lauderdale or from Miami, driving along US 1, 113, 115 miles of overseas highway, which is beautiful, going from key to key. I got there that first time in 1985, and I found this place with the slogan, "We are one human family." And in fact, you see that sticker around the island. All people are created equal and members of one human family. As a gay man, it really appealed to me. The idea that there would be some place where I would feel free to express my sexuality, feel free to just be me. A little bit later that year, I'd like to contrast the place at Key West with Topeka, Kansas, because in 1995, I also had the opportunity on some business to visit Topeka. And we drove past the Westboro Baptist Church, and there were kids and adults outside holding up the horrific banners that they have. And so the images that I have in my mind between these two places are about just as far as they possibly can be. And obviously the symbols favor Key West. Last little bit of poetry, or the last little bit of symbol that I think is interesting, is that for a long time what they claimed was that Key West was closer to Havana than it was to a Walmart. Now, that commercialization takes me into the next issue, and that is the politics. It's really changed. The island has changed in even the 20 years that I've been there. We've gone from perhaps a commercial free zone to one that is devoted to marketing. We have a low-cost bohemian retreat in the past that has kind of turned into some of the most expensive real estate in the United States. The usual impacts of gentrification bring a lot of political impacts along with it and help to give me pause about the sacredness of the space. There are two other aspects that I think are important to call out. One is that Key West has become much less, if not less gay friendly, at least gay accommodating. There are a lot of the guest houses that are gone. There were a lot of facilities that were part of the LGBTQ community that are no longer unique or exclusive to them. So it's not as gay, perhaps, as it used to be. And that, I think, is a reaction to some changes in our society. It's not as special for the gay community as it used to be because there are so many other towns and areas of the country where people can be free to express themselves. But the second and the more interesting impact on the politics of the island is the cruise ship business. The first cruise ship came to Key West in 1969. About 1984, the town government decided to build up this as a goal for economic development. And so they've created 3 separate areas on the island where these giant cruise ships can come in. Last year, there were over 750,000 people who arrived on this little small island via cruise ship. And of course, that resulted in taxes and fees paid to the city government of something on the order of $12 million last year. So there's an economic interest in that. But what it's done is changed the sacred space. The lower end of Duval, that's near the biggest of the 3 facilities, is jam-packed with tourists on the day that the ships are in the harbor. And the nature of the businesses have changed. Lots less local, lots more chain and international businesses that are there. Last year, in fact, the referendum on the idea of expanding the harbor or the channelway, dredging and widening the channel so that larger and larger ships could come into Key West, and it was defeated by 75% of the vote. So I think it's really interesting when you start talking about how politics shape a sacred space to look at some of the issues that have taken a space and really changed the nature of it. Finally, I think it's important to think about putting all this together in my mind and for the people that come there. One of the quotes that was significant out of the text was that when we clothe a place well, and I think this was Martha Nussbaum who said this, when we clothe a space well, we can imagine a world in which we care for everything fragile, and especially goodness and truth, insofar as we are able. That ideal that we are all part of one human family is connected in my brain with this space of Key West. And I think for me it's still a place where, like Dr. Paul says on page 52, where death is not denied and where the gifts of life are affirmed.